You can trace the whole season of Wilds back to one simple, terrifying idea. The Forbidden Lands don't just have an ecosystem, they have an emergency ladder, a layered sequence of corrections built into the land by Wyveria's machine world, meant to prevent the continent from tipping into runaway dominance and energy collapse. Storm phases are one rung, purge floods like the Scarlet Forest's red water are another, Arkveld, the White Wraith, is another, a living reset blade meant to trim apex hoarding before it becomes unstoppable. Guardian variants roaming blind are another. Old security assets waking because the system is stressed. Every episode we've done has been about that ladder climbing higher, and if a ladder climbs long enough, it reaches the rung that ends the argument. That rung is Shia. Wilds doesn't hand Shia to you as a casual reveal. The name comes with weight. You feel it in the way characters sharpen their tone when it's mentioned, and you feel it in the way the land itself behaves as you get closer to its truth. Shia is not introduced like a powerful monster that must be hunted. It's introduced like a last door you're not supposed to open unless the building is already on fire. So tonight, we're doing the thing Monster Hunter stories rarely let us do clearly. We're going to understand the final failsafe from the inside. What is Shia? Why did Wyveria build it? Why did it turn on its creators? And what does its existence tell us about what Wilds is really building toward right now? Because once you understand Shia, you stop seeing Wilds as a new continent story. You start seeing it as a story about whether history can be lived twice. And if so, whether it has to end the same way. Before we dive into the Doomsday layer, quick and sincere pause. If you've been enjoying these long-form lore episodes and you want the finale to keep landing in this same deep, slow way, a like and a subscribe help a lot. It keeps this series visible and makes it possible to keep doing Monster Hunter at this length without shaving the story down. And if there's another game world you want explored like this after Wilds, drop it in the comments. I'm lining up future arcs now, and your picks genuinely decide what gets built next. Alright, let's talk about the monster that ended an empire. To understand Shia, you have to stop thinking of it like a flagship and start thinking of it like a policy. Wyveria did not build the Dragon Torch and then casually sprinkle Guardians around for atmosphere. It built a complete risk management architecture. A civilization running on infinite bioenergy knows it is juggling a paradox. The power that sustains you is also the power that can destroy you if it concentrates in the wrong place. The moment you create a continent-scale energy pulse, you create a continent-scale temptation for dominance hoarding by monsters, by artificial constructs, and by humans themselves. Wyveria's solution was not one tool, it was layers. The first layer was the phase program. Fallow builds pressure. Inclemency vents pressure by shuffling winners in a violent stress state. Plenty redistributes life in a recovery bloom. This keeps apex crowns rotating and prevents any one species from locking a biome into permanent dominance. The second layer was basin purges, like the Scarlet Forest's red water state. Dense energy traps needed extra vents, so Wyveria built chemical resets into water systems to flush accumulated bioenergy before it could become a runaway sink. The third layer was living regulators like Arkveld. If an apex still grew too permanent, if hoarding still spiked faster than weather and purge cycles could contain it, Arkveld was the scalpel. Remove the spike, siphon the excess, and keep the ladder rotating. The fourth layer was the broader Guardian army. Territorial defenders, internal security units, specialized constructs built to respond to localized threats and preserve grid integrity. And then there was the last layer. The layer you don't want to use because using it means you've already admitted the lower layers failed. Shia was that layer. Now, what kind of creature deserves that role? Not a hunter's nightmare, a civilization's nightmare. Think about what Wyveria needed if all other corrections failed, if storms didn't rotate dominances fast enough, if purges didn't vent basins quickly enough, if Arkveld couldn't trim spikes without creating new ones, if Guardian patrols were overwhelmed, if bioenergy feedback was about to go full runaway and turn the entire land spine into an uncontrolled engine. In that scenario, you don't want a gentle solution. You want a system-wide reset. Something that can absorb the grid's excess energy directly and force the continent into a new equilibrium by overwhelming every rival node at once. That's Shia's design logic, a Doomsday Guardian. Shia is described and presented like a draconic construct infused directly by the Dragon Torch. Not merely powered by Wilk the way lesser Guardians are, but plugged into the heart itself. That distinction matters. It makes Shia a creature that doesn't just live on bioenergy. It controls bioenergy by consumption. It is a mobile black hole for the grid's output. A last resort that says, if the system is about to explode from too much concentrated power, release the thing that can swallow power faster than anything else alive. So the first truth of episode 9 is this. Shia wasn't built to be a monster in the ecosystem. It was built to end the ecosystem's current configuration if it became dangerous. A reset doesn't care about comfort, it cares about survival of the whole, and that's why Shia is terrifying even before it moves. But the question that makes Wilds hurt is the next one. If Shia was built for a reset role, why did it turn on Wyveria? Because Wyveria's fall isn't just, we built a big dragon and it went berserk. It's deeper and crueler. The Doomsday Guardian did its job. From Shia's perspective, Wyveria itself became the imbalance. Let that sink in. Wyveria built a machine world to stabilize energy, but the system they created depended on constant tuning and restraint. It depended on cautious calibration of Dragon Torch output, measured distribution through the land spine, and a willingness to accept limits even when infinite power was on tap. The Empire had to live with temptation every day, and it didn't. Empires rarely do. Success breeds faith in control. Control breeds expansion. Expansion breeds hubris. Hubris breeds the exact kind of energy hoarding and dominance escalation the stabilizer was meant to prevent. A civilization that masters a continent begins to treat the continent like property. It pushes the torch harder. It builds more constructs. It sharpens artificial predators. It pushes ecological throughput upward. It begins to believe it can manage any consequence, because management has worked so far. That is how you quietly become the runaway spike in your own system. So, when the grid's emergency ladder climbed, when storms intensified beyond safe limits, when basin purges fired harsher, when apex nodes began locking and hoarding, when Arkveld and other regulators could no longer keep up, the stabilizer interpreted the source of the spike the only way it could. Not as monsters are hoarding. Not as nature is unstable, but as the controlling power in this system is destabilizing the system. Wyveria was the apex hoarder on a continental scale. It was the entity injecting too much energy. It was the dominance node that would not rotate. It had made itself the permanent king, and the permanent king is precisely what the stabilizer was designed to destroy. So Shia wakes. It feeds. It grows beyond its intended constraints. It begins absorbing Dragon Torch energy at a rate Wyveria cannot control. And just like Arkveld, but at the scale of a god, it does what its programming says. Remove the dominance spike. Reset the system. Wyveria becomes the target. That's the horror of machine world logic. It doesn't hate you. It doesn't love you. It responds to function. If you become the function it is meant to correct, it will correct you. So the second truth of episode 9 is this. Shia turned on Wyveria because Wyveria had become the imbalance Shia was built to erase. That makes the ancient collapse feel less like a freak accident and more like a tragedy of inevitability. Now, Wilds doesn't rub your face in this as a moral lecture. It shows you through the land's present state. Look at the Forbidden Lands today. The stabilizer layers are still running, but without steering. Storm cycles vent pressure, purge floods, vent basins, Arkveld trims spikes, Guardians patrol blind. The ladder is still there because the grid is still alive. The reset philosophy survived the empire that built it. In other words, Wyveria died, but its emergency logic didn't. And that's why Shia matters now, not just as history. Because if the ladder exists in the present and has already climbed to Arkveld and broader Guardian awakenings, then the question is straightforward. What happens when the ladder reaches Shia again? Wilds is very careful about how it escalates toward that possibility. It doesn't say Shia will wake as a cheap cliffhanger. It shows you why Shia would wake if it did. Storms are harsher and more frequent. Plenty windows feel compressed. Apex ladders accelerate and rotate violently. Purge basins bleed harder. Arkveld has awakened and is trimming apexes bluntly, creating vacuums that the system fills with even worse spikes. Guardians surface in greater numbers, distorting ecology and tightening feedback loops. The land spine leaks wilk in bursts instead of steady flow. That's not random drama. That is the stabilizer climbing because lower corrections aren't containing the pressure anymore. Remember what an emergency ladder is for. If the system senses runaway dominance and energy concentration approaching a catastrophic threshold, it will escalate to the layer capable of swallowing the concentration in full. Arkveld is already a sign that threshold is near, because Arkveld only makes sense as a tool to prevent the system from having to use Shia. When the scalpel wakes, it's because the fever is rising. When the scalpel fails, the Doomsday layer comes next. So Episode 9's present tense danger is this. The Forbidden Lands are structurally drifting toward the same reset condition that killed Wyveria. Now, if that sounds bleak, good. It should, because Wilds is not a low-stakes story. It's a story set in the only place on Earth where the ancient catastrophe is still breathing. But the point of the season isn't to say history repeats, full stop. The point is to ask whether this time the humans inside the machine world can step differently. That's why Episode 8 mattered. The Guild is in the land now. The Keepers are in the land now. Nata is bridging those cultures now. The modern world has a chance Wyveria never had. Living memory of restraint sitting beside the tools of intervention. Shia is the test of that chance. Because if Shia reawakens in the present, it will not be waking into a civilization identical to Wyveria. It will be waking into a fractured human presence. The Guild with its regulated hunting structure and its temptation to manage. And the Keepers with their restraint philosophy and their fear of repeating ancient overreach. And which human structure becomes the dominant spike in Shia's eyes depends entirely on what choices those humans make as pressure rises. This is where we start seeing Wilds less as a monster story and more as a philosophical confrontation between two different ways of surviving power. Wyveria's way was mastery. The Guild's way is regulated mastery. The Keeper's way is humility. Shia doesn't care about ideals. It cares about outcomes. If regulated mastery turns into energy hoarding, it will correct. If humility prevents hoarding, it may never need to wake at all. Now, let's talk about how Shia's existence reframes Arkveld, because that link is one of the most elegant pieces of Wild's lore. Arkveld is a failsafe specifically designed to prevent the need for a Doomsday reset. That means Arkveld's job is to keep dominant spikes below Shia's alarm threshold. It trims apexes and siphons excess energy, so the system never has to swallow everything at once. In a healthy machine world, those two tools would be in careful balance. Arkveld handles local spikes, Shia stays asleep. In the present, Arkveld is awake without steering. It's trimming hard, not precisely. Every time it trims, it creates a vacuum. Vacuums in a high-energy grid don't stay empty. They get refilled by the most aggressive candidate near the top. That refill is often more violent than the previous node. So Arkveld's blind trimming can actually accelerate the dominance spiral it was meant to slow. That's not because Arkveld is bad, it's because the system has lost its coordinator. Think of it like a thermostat in a damaged house. If the sensor is broken, the heater will kick on at the wrong times, making the room hotter when it should cool, pushing the system toward an eventual emergency shutdown. Arkveld's wakefulness, in other words, is a paradoxical sign. It means the system is stressed enough to need regulation, and it also means regulation itself is now part of the feedback problem. The more Arkveld swings, the closer you get to the rung Arkveld exists to avoid, Shia. So the link is tragic and clean. Arkveld's feral loop is one of the main reasons the system edges toward Doomsday again. Now, let's bring the Scarlet Forest back in too, because Shia logic threads straight through those red waters. A purge flood is an ecosystem reset at basin scale. Shia is a reset at continental scale. When a purge basin starts bleeding harsher and more frequently, it's because the system is struggling to vent energy in smaller ways. It's trying to keep pressure below Doomsday threshold. So every red flood you see is a quiet plea from the machine world. Let this be enough. Let this vent reduce the fever. Don't make me wake the last layer. In Wilds, the plea is getting louder. That is why the land feels like it's tightening towards something even when you're not in a cutscene. You are in a world where the environment itself is bargaining with you to avoid its own worst corrective act. And this brings us to a question you might not have asked yet. What would Shia actually do if it woke now? We know what it did then. It fed on Dragon Torch energy, grew beyond control, destabilized the grid further, and erased Wyveria by turning reset logic on the civilization itself. In the present, the landscape is different, but the logic is the same. If Shia wakes, it will not pick a nice arena for a boss fight. It will act like an emergency process. It will move toward the richest energy concentrations. It will consume them. It will neutralize dominance nodes by force. It will effectively try to swallow the imbalance faster than the imbalance can grow. At a minimum, that means apex ecosystems across the Forbidden Lands would be flattened temporarily. Guardian nodes might be drained or erased. Landspine surges might be pulled into Shia like a sink. The phase system itself might be forced into a new rhythm. In other words, Shia is not a monster that adds danger into the world. It is a monster that changes the world's operating mode. And that's why Wyveria feared it, even as they built it. You don't deploy Shia unless you're willing to trade your current civilization for a chance at a new stability. Wyveria wasn't willing to make that trade consciously. The system made it for them. So now imagine the modern humans faced with the same choice. If the pressure rises high enough, and if the stabilizer begins waking Shia logic, the guild may be forced into a moment Wyveria never survived. A conscious decision about how much to intervene and how much to step aside. Do you fight the Doomsday layer to preserve current settlements and current ecology, risking making yourself the dominant spike? Do you assist the reset, risking widespread destruction, but maybe restabilizing the grid? Do you try to shut the grid down entirely, risking unknown consequences in a world that has lived on its pulse for millennia? Do you follow the Keeper's path and attempt to ride the phases without forcing corrections, even if that means enduring a near collapse to avoid a greater one? Wilds is steering toward that kind of dilemma, even if it doesn't spell it out in one line. Now, to keep ourselves honest, we should touch the counter-reading. Could Shia just be a powerful boss whose backstory is simple, weapon went rogue, without all this systemic moral weight? You can read it that way if you want a neat monster story. Monster Hunter often gives neat monster stories, but Wilds keeps returning to the same structural motif: layered corrections, feedback spirals, emergency escalations. Shia isn't a random apex. It is explicitly tied to the Dragon Torch and to Wyveria's collapse. It is framed as the last line in a stabilizer architecture. The game doesn't need you to interpret that. It shows it. So, while you can enjoy Shia as big scary dragon fight, the world around it makes clear that fighting it is fighting a system's final decision. That's why Episode 9 is the fulcrum of the season. Once you understand Shia, every earlier mystery clicks into a single arc. The Forbidden Lands are not just suffering because monsters are strong. They are suffering because their ancient safety ladder is climbing again. Shia is the rung that says, if you don't change something, I will. Which brings us right to the doorstep of Episode 10, the finale. If Shia is the Doomsday layer, then the season's final question becomes almost painfully human. Can the modern world break the ladder before the ladder breaks the world?